Hi folks, welcome to the weekend. I hope you've had a good reading week. And on that subject, what have I been reading? Well, strictly speaking, the answer to that is nothing, in that I haven't actually finished any books this week. And there's a couple of reasons for that. They're both longish books, one longer than the other. And last weekend, where I normally have a bit of time for reading, I was just busy, even though it was a long weekend, and I didn't pick a book up at all, in fact. Fortunately, though, for this segment, which would otherwise be very short, I am about 90 or more % through both books, and I'll definitely finish one of them, maybe even both, tomorrow. So I think I'm in a position where I've read enough that I can share my thoughts. Excuses out of the way. The first that I'm nearly finished is Neverness by David Zindell. And this one is thought by many to be a classic. It's often compared to Dune in terms of its kind of complexity. And it has been elevated to the Broderick and De Filippo's list of 101 best science fiction novels to boot. And my expectations, therefore, were pretty high. But what do I think? Have those expectations been met? Or are they being met, strictly speaking? This is one of those books where the world, the universe is gradually revealed through what the characters experience, their conversations, their immediate surroundings, throwaway remarks that they make. There's very little explanatory exposition. Zindell makes us work a little bit to build a picture. We're in the far future, a goodly period after the swarming, which seems to refer to the exodus from Earth. This is long enough in the past that individual planets have had thousands of years to develop different cultures, different forms of humanity even. We have faster than light travel, the trick to which is held, as it so often is, by a secret guild, the pilots, who are a guild of mathematicians, to which our main character, Mallory Ringes, is apprenticed at the beginning of the book. And really the whole of the book, Neverness, is a story of his quest, his journey. And that starts off with a visit to something called the solid state entity, which is an AI so enormous in advance that it's effectively a god, one of several that call a nebula home. Mallory effectively gets dared to try to penetrate the nebula and communicate with the gods. And whilst he's there, which is a bit of an adventure in itself, he is told that the secret of immortality, the future of humanity, can be found in the DNA of the oldest humans. And what are some of the oldest humans? Neanderthals. Let's get some DNA from some Neanderthals. Handily enough, there are several tribes of so-called Alloy living in the frozen wastes of Icefall, where Neverness is located. And those Alloy have ancestors who long ago decided to alter their DNA to become Neanderthal. And there's a long section of the book preparing for that mission, and then living with the Alloy tribes, collecting, believe it or not, their jizz and their toenails and various other bits of hair clippings and God knows what else. And there's a climactic end to that section, which has, let's say, consequences for the way that the rest of the book plays out. Mallory ends up going through some sort of rebirth on the ocean world of Agathanji, which reminded me of the pattern jugglers in the Revelation Space universe, Alistair Reynolds' books. And over the course of several years in this ocean world, Mallory is rebuilt and rewired and improved in ways that surprise even him as the book progresses. He returns to Neverness to find plotting and schism and even war amongst the pilots, and is forced to choose sides when he gets there. In the meantime, stars have been exploding in an area called the Vild, or the Vild, and they're getting closer. Why are the stars exploding, and how is this linked to Mallory's quest, is the fundamental question that the book answers as it gets closer to the end. So, what did I like? So Zindell uses some pretty rich, even ripe language. It reminded me a little bit of Cordwainer Smith, actually. There's lots of unfamiliar words which you can actually come to understand through sort of repeated contextual use. I liked Icefall, the planet on which Neverness is located. It's a wintry world. There's a lot of ice skating and other wintry words which don't have English equivalents, but you sort of gather their meaning as you go. There are throwaway remarks and hints and eventually evidence of a much wider galaxy of inhabited planets beyond Icefall. And I enjoyed the Neanderthal section. It was pretty easy to forget for a while that we're in a science fiction book. It felt like a sort of almost like a fantasy at various points. But let's just say that the Alloy had regressed very convincingly to hunter-gatherer societies. I was interested in the solid state entity and the other gods of the piece and what role they played and why. And I enjoyed the mathematical nature of the piloting. Mallory and these fellow pilots have to construct mathematical proofs in their heads with the aid of the ship's computer in order to map his way through hyperspace. And I thought that was fairly unique. A little bit on the debit side, it is rather long, and it's not an effortless read. Some books of this girth, which is nearly 700 pages, you can whip through pretty fast, but that's not one of them. It's not as complex or ornate as I found Tom Toner's Amarantine books, but it's certainly not a book where you can check your brain in at the front door and just enjoy. I am enjoying it, but I'm having to work a little bit for it. I think Zindell is surfing on a wave of Baroque science fiction that came before him. The likes of Jack Vance, Gene Wolfe, Caldwell Smith, as I said, A.A. Atanasio, and maybe even Samuel Delany are all lurking in the background as possible influences, I think, on David Zindell. I gather that there's a follow-on trilogy, A Requiem for Homo Sapiens, with Mallory's son as the main character in those books. So whilst that is related to Neverness, this is a fully contained novel. It's its own story and can be read on its own. So I haven't quite finished it, but so far so good. And the second book that I've been busy reading this week but haven't quite finished, I've got about an hour and a half left to listen to, is Eifelheim by Michael Flynn, obviously on audiobook. It's about half the length of Neverness, at about just over 320 pages, but it's taken me a similar amount of time to get through, purely just for lack of opportunity. That I'm in a phase of my training for races at the moment where I haven't been running as much this week. It was a recovery week, so there's just been less hours out on the trail listening to audiobooks. But anyway, Eifelheim is a pleasing blend of first contact and historical fiction with a heavy dose, I think, of detective work and research added to the mix. Eifelheim has two plot threads. One is in our near future, possibly even our present day, where we follow a historian, Tom, as he tries to figure out why there's a gap in his historical topographic map of Germany. There's a gap in the network of nodes of civilization, a place where there ought to be a settlement but isn't. The Black Death, of course, devastated entire villages in the 14th century, so perhaps that's an explanation, but no, without exception, all of those settlements were resettled as the population recovered, but not in this one place. So why is that? That's the central mystery of the modern day thread, as Tom and his partner and possible love interest Janet, I think it's Janet, who's an archivist and librarian, try to find the evidence to figure out what the hell was going on. I am finding this thread a little bit less interesting than the other one, which is set in the mid-14th century in what will eventually become the village of Eifelheim, or the town. Fortunately for me, the majority of the book, I would guess probably 75% of it, is spent in the 14th century. And in that thread, we meet numerous villagers, including the local priest, Dietrich, who's an educated man, it turns out, with a past. In the beginning of the book, we hear dark hints that the plague, the Black Death, is spreading across Europe, laying waste to entire towns. But it's not here, or it's not yet. And life continues in all of its feudal glory. A flash in the sky one day, though, in the evening, attracts Dietrich's attention. And lo, it's a frigging flying saucer with actual aliens. The Krenken, as they come to be known, are gradually revealed to be insectoid with an evolutionary past involving something like a grasshopper to our apes. Dietrich has to overcome his fear and begins to communicate with the Krenken via their version of Alexa. It's like a universal translator. The majority of the book then tells of the Krenken's attempts to get their ship's Fritz hyperspace drive working again, but that's an uphill battle, fibre optics not being something that the local smithy can knock up in the 14th century. We witness the Krenken's gradual absorption into village life, including their exploration of Christian faith, encouraged, of course, by our friend Father Dietrich. The Krenken's tragedy is that the available foodstuffs are lacking the necessary nutrients and they are slowly dying. Not to be outdone, the plague comes a-visiting and the humans start to die like flies too. So Eifelheim is an exploration of faith, of hope, of deep theological questions. Can aliens be Christians, and can they be saved in a religious sense? I enjoyed the interactions between Dietrich, by the standards of his time, a very learned man, and the Krenken as they try to explain cosmology or electronics to him. Even the germ theory of disease transmission is tricky to explain. The gulf of knowledge between them is huge. Although maybe a bit less interesting to me, the contemporary sections were also good, as Tom gradually uncovers snippets of information, piecing together bit by bit what happened in Oberhochwald, which became Teufelsheim, or Devil's Home, and eventually corrupted to Eifelheim, which is now a gap in the map. Tom's wife is a theoretical physicist, and I'm getting the strong impression, with an hour and a half still to listen to, that she will be the glue between the two plot threads, as she gets close to proving that hyperspace travel is a practical possibility, that the concepts of time and distance are elastic. The obvious link, I imagine, being to the Krenken's spaceship. But with the Black Death featuring large in the latter stages of the book, and with historians looking back in the contemporary thread, though without any actual time travel, it did remind me strongly of Connie Willis's Doomsday Book, a recent read for me, which I also enjoyed very much. I like historical fiction, so I'm definitely here for a science fiction novel with a heavy dose of that, and so I'm enjoying it, and I'm looking forward to the last 10% or whatever it is, tying up the remaining loose ends. So that's the 2 books that I've almost read this week. What have you read or almost read? Do let me know in the comments, particularly if you have something that you'd want to heartily recommend to me or to the others. Channel stuff next then, briefly. Subs are at 5,840, which is up a very modest 18, quite a small tally compared to normal, but still, if you're one of that small but perfectly formed group of 18, or if you've stumbled across my channel today for the first time, then a huge welcome to you. I'm John, and I focus on collecting, reading and waffling on about science fiction books, old and new. That 18 subscribers is actually by some distance the lowest weekly growth since the early days of the channel. And I do feel in a bit of a rut at the moment from a creative point of view, if I can call it that rather grand term. I think that's reflected in the diminishing returns from a new subscriber point of view. It does feel at the moment on any given day I'm as likely to lose subs almost as fast as I add new ones, and that's fine. There's always some churn. People will always be clearing out their subscriptions if they don't like to watch a given channel. I do the same from time to time, but it does feel a little bit 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. But if I step back and look at the videos that I've put out over the last couple of months, they have covered the basics. It's the sort of recurring content which the core viewership of this channel, and that's you probably if you're watching this video, will have watched and I hope enjoyed. But I have been unable, or if I'm completely honest, unmotivated to put the time into more in-depth videos, which I've enjoyed doing in the past, the ones that require a bit more research, a bit more script writing, which do often get wider views and get shared more broadly by the mysterious algorithm, which does in turn then bring in new folks. I do, having complained though, I do dislike it when folks like me, YouTubers, whine about their numbers being off, particularly if they're inclined to somehow scold their viewers for not watching sufficiently. So don't worry, I don't feel entitled in that way, far from it. And if I want the reward, such as it is, of channel growth, then it's me that has to put the work in to have the ideas and to turn them into worthwhile content. So that's really what I just need to do and get back on that horse. All right, that's quite enough of that. Comment of the week this week is from Entwiner, who speculates that I might be retired, as I clearly have too much time on my hands for reading. I certainly wish that were true. I'd retire tomorrow if I thought that was financially sensible, but I'm afraid that is several years away yet, sadly, where several is a number between realistically 5 and 15, hopefully nearer to 5. But I get through about the same number of books each month. It's 10 or 12, sometimes a little bit more, depending on the length of the books. And compared to some that you see on YouTube, or BookTube specifically, that's kind of chicken feed. But if I compare it to my own reading in the past, it's way more than I used to get through. I was somebody that used to read for 15, 20 minutes before going to bed, and maybe sometimes on the train on the way to or from work. And really that was it. And I would get through a book a month if I was lucky. So all that's changed really is that there's no great secret to it. So I just dedicate the time to it. It's a hobby, an interest, a borderline obsession, some might argue, particularly my wife. Some people spend time fishing or playing golf or gardening and Dungeons and Dragons or whatever, drinking and carousing even, binge watching TV shows. And basically I do very little of those things, honest gov. And my spare time is either running, which is really also reading because I'm listening to audiobooks at the same time, or I'm sat amongst my books in my office, come library, reading. I get up early in the morning, relatively speaking. I on a work day, I read for an hour and a half, sometimes before work, and even a little bit at lunchtime, and usually as well after work, if I haven't got to go for a run. And then in the evenings, if I can get away with it, if my wife's busy with something, or at the weekends when I've got a quiet hour or two. There's an element of it being a bit of a cycle. I have a channel, obviously you're watching it, about science fiction books, and I'd have a lot less to talk about if I didn't read a bunch of books. But at the moment, that feels like a virtuous circle and not a vicious circle. And but I can see how that might happen. But at the moment, I'm comfortable with the amount of reading that I'm doing, and I don't feel like I'm putting myself under any undue pressure. So really, I just read quite a bit. I read, I think, fairly quickly, I suppose, compared to some perhaps, and the audio books help to add to the monthly tally. And that's it. There's nothing supernatural about it. I don't have any special powers that I'm aware of. Thank you to Entwiner, or is it Entwiner? Entwiner? I don't know. But however you pronounce that, thank you for taking the time to leave a comment, and to all of you who do the same thing. I do very much appreciate it. Let us take a quick look at what was on the channel this week. On Sunday, there was the inaugural bookshelf roast, in which I point and laugh at people's shelves. Many of you were very kind and sent in photos either on email or via Blue Sky of your bookshelves en masse. And I enjoyed looking at them and poking a bit of light fun at them at the same time, and grading them accordingly. So that was a bit of an unusual one. I think that's something that I'll do from time to time, not terribly often. I would have thought once or twice a year at most. On Tuesday, I chose my TBR pile for June, using, as usual, the Bingo Balls of Fate and the Decision Dice of Destiny. And I'm pretty excited about the books that process has thrown up for this month. And I did allow myself one or two readers' picks this month too. So it wasn't all left to chance. On the book buying front, I have bought 0 books this week, if you can believe it. Strictly speaking, when I say 0, it's not quite 0, but it would round down to 0. And I've bought an interesting sounding anthology from PS Publishing. It was on sale and everything. And one other book that I can't quite remember. It was a vintage hardback that I found for a few pounds on eBay that I couldn't resist. But essentially, I've been quite restrained in the last week or so. I think for the last couple of weeks, really, aside from the book detox, where in January last year, when I put myself into book buying choky, this might be the most fallow period since I started the channel for book buying. But as I've said a couple of times recently, I do have an influx heading my way in about 10 days' time, and plus there will be a dealer visit, 2 dealer visits in fact, which will probably result in 1 or 2 books being purchased. But as it stands, I think it's the same as last week. The to be hauled pile is still 5 books, although there are, as I said, a couple more on my way. The to be hauled pile then is still 5 books, although there's a couple more that I've recently ordered that are on their way, plus the aforementioned influx. Taking a little bit of a look ahead, on Sunday there will be an unhaul, believe it or not, of some B format paperbacks that I've read, books that don't pass the quality test, that I don't intend ever to reread, or in some cases that are duplicates that I haven't already got rid of. And that process was actually surprisingly cathartic, and I've freed up quite a bit of shelf space. So that's worth a watch if you want to see a man in pain decide which books to get rid of. Later in the week, next week, there will be May's wrap up, where I will review briefly each of the books that I've read in May, and I will rank them, and then I will ultimately declare a book of the month. I haven't really thought about how I'm going to pull that together, but at some point between now and maybe Thursday of next week, that video will appear. And as I've mentioned once or twice before, I have recently completed the Pan Lozenge collection, so I now have all 80 of those books. And I'm waiting for the 25th of 25 Venture SF books to arrive. So both of those collections that I will run through. And I'm expecting any day now a special broken binding edition of Hyperion to arrive. And to somewhat in celebration of that arrival, or at least prompted by it, I thought I would take a look at Hyperion and what makes it great, why it's often considered to be one of the best science fiction books evs. What will I be reading? Well, obviously I'll be finishing Neverness and Eifelheim hopefully tomorrow, and that will leave 2 of May's TBR choices unfinished or unstarted in fact, and those will just go back on the shelves and they'll live to fight another day. So from now on, I'm picking from June's TBR pile, which was the result of the video that was out on Tuesday. So first up, I'm going to be reading one of my readers' picks, which is, what's it called? The Immeasurable Heaven by Caspar Guillon, which I'm very much looking forward to. That's a new book from an author that I'm somewhat familiar with, although not in that guise, all will become clear. And then I'm going to have a crack, if I finish that, at Robert Heinlein's Puppet Masters, which should be a quick read. It's relatively slender. And then, or not then, in parallel to both of those, once I finish Eifelheim, I shall be jumping onto on audiobook The Passage. And this is a bit of a tome, and the audiobook is something like 36 hours. It won't be that much for me because I'll be playing it on something like 1.6 speed, maybe a little bit more. So it should be something more like 20 hours, but still, that will take me a couple of weeks to get through, I think. What I might do with that, if I get through these 2 guys, what I might do is alternate, and I'll read it in real book as well, a chapter or 2 at a time, and then pick it up again the next time I'm out running or whatever on audiobook, and make a bit faster progress through it perhaps. But look, I'm looking forward to all of those, particularly The Passage perhaps, as I hear that's going to be right up my street. That's everything. As always, thank you for watching, and until next time, Goodbye for now.